The secure satellite link connected Beijing to Caracas at exactly 11:47 p.m. Venezuelan time, 6 months to the minute after American forces had extracted Nicolás Maduro from that same city. Chinese President Xi Jinping was staring at video footage that represented the end of everything his regime had spent 20 years building. American oil executives touring Chinese-built refineries that were now under U.S. corporate control. $20 billion in Chinese infrastructure investment handed over to Chevron and ExxonMobil without compensation. On the other end of the link, the new American-appointed administrator of Venezuela's energy sector was delivering a message that would reshape global power for the next century. Mr. President, China is welcome to bid on future contracts under our new transparent bidding process, but Chinese state-owned enterprises will no longer receive preferential treatment in the Western Hemisphere. Translation: China's two-decade campaign for economic influence in Latin America was over. I've spent 30 years analyzing the rise and fall of global powers. I've watched empires collapse, witnessed the birth of new world orders, and mapped the geographic and economic forces that determine which nations thrive and which nations fade into historical footnotes. But I've never witnessed the moment when an entire global system transforms in real time. That moment is happening right now. The Venezuelan operation wasn't just about oil or drugs or one Latin American dictator. It was the opening move in the complete restructuring of global power, a restructuring that will determine how the next century of human history unfolds. What comes after Maduro isn't just a new Venezuelan government, it's a new world order. And the terrifying thing, nobody, not in Washington, not in Beijing, not in European capitals, fully understands what they've unleashed. The phone call that ended an era. Picture this. At the exact moment Xi Jinping was absorbing the reality of China's Latin American defeat, Donald Trump was holding what White House insiders call his victory lap cabinet meeting, a gathering designed to plan America's next moves in what Trump was now openly calling the reconquest of the Western Hemisphere. The agenda was breathtaking in its scope. Item 1. Consolidation of Venezuelan energy assets under American corporate control. Item 2. Negotiated transitions for Cuba, Nicaragua, and Bolivia. Item 3. Renegotiation of Chinese infrastructure deals across Latin America. Item 4. Establishment of permanent American security partnerships with all hemispheric governments. Item 5. Extension of the model to other regions where China threatened American interests. That last item, the global application of the Venezuelan methodology, represented the most ambitious expansion of American power since World War II. Trump wasn't just reclaiming Latin America. He was establishing a precedent that America could and would use military force to maintain economic dominance anywhere in the world. The Monroe Doctrine had gone global. China's strategic capitulation. What happened next in Beijing will be studied in political science courses for the next century as the moment China acknowledged the limits of its global ambitions. Xi Jinping convened an emergency Politburo meeting that lasted 36 hours, the longest continuous policy session since the Cultural Revolution. The topic wasn't whether China should resist American expansion, but how China could survive American dominance without triggering a nuclear war. The superpower that had challenged American hegemony for 20 years was planning its own strategic retreat. The numbers that drove Chinese decision-making were devastating. $140 billion in Latin American investments effectively lost. 50-plus infrastructure projects suspended or transferred to American control. 200,000 Chinese workers in Latin America evacuated or reassigned. 30 years of diplomatic progress reversed in 6 months. But the real blow wasn't economic, it was psychological. Chinese leadership had based their entire global strategy on the assumption that America wouldn't risk major confrontation to maintain hemispheric dominance. That assumption had proved catastrophically wrong. Chinese military planners were presenting Xi with strategic assessments that read like surrender documents. America's willingness to use military force against any challenge to its hemispheric interests makes Chinese investment in Latin America untenable. Chinese naval power cannot protect Chinese economic interests in the Western Hemisphere against sustained American pressure. Continued competition for Latin American influence risks escalation that China cannot win. The Middle Kingdom was acknowledging that half the world was permanently off-limits to Chinese ambitions. The Great Withdrawal. What followed was the fastest strategic retreat by a major power in modern history, faster than Soviet withdrawal from Eastern Europe, more comprehensive than British decolonization. Operation Golden Return was China's secret plan for extracting maximum value from Latin American investments before American pressure made them worthless. Chinese state-owned enterprises began quietly selling infrastructure projects to European or Latin American companies. Chinese banks started calling in loans and redirecting capital toward Asia and Africa. Chinese diplomatic missions reduced staff and closed consulates. China wasn't just retreating from Latin America, it was fleeing. But the retreat came with a strategic pivot that Western intelligence agencies are still struggling to understand. China was redirecting the resources it had spent challenging America in Latin America toward consolidating Chinese dominance in Asia. If China couldn't be a global hegemon, China would become the unquestioned Asian hegemon. The implications were staggering. Every dollar China had spent competing with America in Venezuela could now be spent strengthening Chinese control over Taiwan, the South China Sea, and Southeast Asian trade routes. America's victory in Latin America might have made China more dangerous in Asia, not less. The Asian compensation. Within weeks of the Latin American withdrawal, China began the most aggressive expansion of military and economic power in Asian history. $200 billion in new infrastructure investment across Southeast Asia. 50,000 additional Chinese military personnel deployed to artificial islands in the South China Sea. Economic pressure on Asian countries that maintained significant American partnerships. China was applying the lessons of American success in Latin America to Chinese expansion in Asia. If America could use military pressure to secure economic dominance in the Western Hemisphere, China could use the same methods to secure dominance in the Eastern Hemisphere. Taiwan, the island that China considers its most important territorial claim, was receiving unprecedented military pressure as China redirected forces from Latin American deployments to Asian objectives. Chinese leadership was essentially saying, you can have Latin America, but Asia belongs to us. The strategy was brilliant and terrifying. Acknowledge American hemispheric dominance in exchange for American acknowledgement of Chinese Asian dominance. A world divided into exclusive spheres of influence, with each superpower supreme in its own region. The European calculation. Europe found itself in the impossible position of a continent that had spent 70 years avoiding having to choose between superpowers, suddenly forced to choose between two superpowers that were each demanding exclusive loyalty. America was requiring European support for hemispheric dominance. China was demanding European partnership for Asian expansion. Russia was offering European protection against American pressure. Every choice led to dependence on one superpower and vulnerability to the others. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz was reportedly holding emergency consultations about scenarios that sounded like science fiction. Could Europe survive economically without Chinese manufacturing? Could Europe survive militarily without American protection? Could Europe survive strategically without Russian energy? The answer to all three questions was the same: probably not. European leaders were discovering that 70 years of American protection had created dependencies that couldn't be quickly replaced, while 70 years of economic integration had created vulnerabilities that couldn't be easily defended. Europe wasn't just caught between superpowers, Europe had become a prize to be won by superpowers. French President Emmanuel Macron's response revealed European desperation disguised as European ambition. Europe must become a superpower in its own right, capable of defending European interests against any external pressure. Translation: Europe needed to build capabilities in 5 years that had taken America and China decades to develop. The likelihood of European success wasn't high. The Latin American transformation. 6 months after Maduro's extraction, Latin America was undergoing the most rapid political and economic transformation in its history, not through revolution or popular uprising, but through systematic American economic colonization. Venezuelan oil production had increased by 300% under American corporate management. Colombian cooperation with American anti-drug operations had eliminated Chinese infrastructure projects. Mexican industrial policy had been reoriented toward American supply chains. Every Latin American country was discovering that partnership with America meant subordination to American priorities. But the transformation wasn't entirely negative. American investment was replacing Chinese loans with better terms. American technology was upgrading infrastructure that Chinese companies had built but never properly maintained. American markets were providing export opportunities that Chinese partnerships had promised but never delivered. Latin America was becoming more prosperous but less independent. The political implications were complex. Most Latin American populations supported closer American partnership, while most Latin American governments resented the loss of sovereignty that American partnership required. America was popular with Latin American people and hated by Latin American politicians. Trump's solution was characteristically direct: support popular leaders who embraced American partnership and pressure unpopular leaders who resisted American priorities. Democracy, but only for governments that supported American interests. The global ripple effects. The success of the Venezuelan model was creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the Western Hemisphere. Africa. Countries with significant Chinese investment were receiving American security consultations about protecting their sovereignty from foreign economic manipulation. Southeast Asia. American diplomatic pressure was increasing on countries that participated in Chinese Belt and Road projects. Central Asia. American intelligence agencies were exploring partnerships with local governments concerned about Chinese influence. Even Europe. American officials were privately discussing whether Chinese economic penetration of European markets constituted a threat to NATO security. The message was clear. The Venezuelan methodology wasn't limited to Latin America. Any country with significant Chinese economic partnerships could potentially face American liberation if their cooperation with China threatened American strategic interests. The entire global economy was being forced to choose sides. China's last gambit? Faced with global American pressure and diminishing international options, Chinese leadership made a decision that intelligence analysts are calling the most dangerous gambit since the Cuban Missile Crisis. If China couldn't challenge American hemispheric dominance, maybe China could force America to accept Chinese regional dominance through the threat of nuclear confrontation. On December 15th, 2026, exactly 1 year after the Venezuelan operation, China began the largest military buildup in Asian history. Every available Chinese military asset was positioned for what Beijing called the final resolution of territorial disputes in the China Sea. Translation: China was preparing to invade Taiwan. The strategy was clear. Present America with a choice between accepting Chinese control over Taiwan or risking nuclear war to defend an island 8,000 miles from American territory. China was betting that America wouldn't fight a nuclear war for Taiwan any more than America would accept Chinese competition in Venezuela. But China was about to discover that geography worked both ways. If distance made Chinese power projection to Latin America impossible, distance also made American power projection to Taiwan extremely difficult. The question was whether Trump understood the geographic limitations of American power, or whether American success in Latin America had made Trump believe that American power was unlimited. Trump's moment of truth. Trump's response to the Taiwan crisis would determine whether the world was entering an era of peaceful superpower coexistence or heading toward World War III. Option 1. Accept Chinese dominance in Asia in exchange for Chinese acknowledgement of American dominance in Latin America. Option 2. Challenge Chinese expansion in Asia and risk nuclear confrontation. Option 3. Attempt to maintain American global dominance through military force that might exceed American capabilities. Intelligence reports were describing a president who was struggling with a decision that would define his legacy and potentially determine human survival. Trump had proven that America could dominate the Western Hemisphere. The question was whether America could dominate the entire world. The Venezuelan operation had been so successful that it had created expectations for American action that America might not be able to fulfill. Success had become its own trap. The New World Order crystallizes. As I write this, exactly 1 year after Maduro's capture, the new global order is crystallizing into a form that nobody planned but everyone must accept. America controls the Western Hemisphere completely. China dominates Asia increasingly. Europe chooses dependence over independence. Africa becomes a secondary competition ground. Russia exploits opportunities created by superpower competition. This isn't the multipolar world that political scientists predicted. It's not the unipolar American dominance that neoconservatives desired. It's not the Chinese century that Beijing had planned. It's a bipolar world divided by geography, with each superpower supreme in its own sphere and unable to challenge the other's core interests without risking mutual destruction. The Venezuelan operation didn't just secure American control over Latin American oil. It established the principle that superpowers can use military force to maintain economic dominance in their geographic spheres. China learned this lesson and applied it to Taiwan. Russia learned this lesson and applied it to Eastern Europe. Every regional power learned that spheres of influence are enforced by military power, not respected through diplomatic agreement. the terrifying equilibrium. What we're witnessing isn't the end of superpower competition, it's the institutionalization of superpower competition within geographic constraints. America and China aren't becoming friends. They're becoming rival empires that acknowledge each other's regional supremacy while competing for influence in contested spaces. The Cold War never ended. It just moved to different geography. But this new equilibrium is more dangerous than the original Cold War because it's based on proven willingness to use military force rather than mutual deterrence through fear. Trump proved America would fight for hemispheric dominance. Xi is proving China will fight for Asian dominance. The question isn't whether there will be military confrontation between superpowers. The question is where and when. The final cliffhanger. As I finish writing this analysis, reports are coming in of American naval movements toward the Taiwan Strait, the first direct American challenge to Chinese regional dominance since the Latin American crisis began. Trump has apparently decided that American global dominance requires challenging Chinese regional dominance. China has apparently decided that Chinese survival requires defending Taiwan regardless of American pressure. Two nuclear superpowers are heading toward direct military confrontation over an island that both consider essential to their strategic interests. The Venezuelan operation was supposed to secure American dominance without risking major war. Instead, it may have made major war inevitable by proving that military force works better than diplomatic negotiation. Success bred ambition. Ambition bred overconfidence. Overconfidence is about to breed catastrophe. The new world order that emerged from Maduro's capture isn't stable, peaceful, or sustainable. It's a temporary arrangement between superpowers who have learned that military force achieves objectives that diplomacy cannot. What comes after Maduro isn't just American hemispheric dominance or Chinese regional retreat. What comes after Maduro is the discovery of whether two nuclear superpowers can coexist on the same planet, or whether the success of military force in achieving political objectives makes military force the only language superpowers understand. The answer will determine whether human civilization survives the next decade. The New World Order is here, and it's more dangerous than the old one.